Rain-slicked streets reflected neon lights from shop signs and taxi roofs. The city was alive, horns blaring, tires splashing through puddles, and people hustling under umbrellas. Amid the chaos, an older man stood on the curb, calm, his coat slightly wet from the drizzle. A taxi pulled up beside him. The driver, young and cocky, leaned back in his seat, smirking. "What's this, some old guy thinking he deserves a ride?" he muttered to himself. Without hesitation, he slammed the door, cutting the man off. The older man didn't react. He adjusted his jacket, squared his shoulders, and surveyed the street with a quiet, steady gaze. His eyes moved deliberately, noting every movement, every shadow. People nearby stole glances, sensing something unusual, something they couldn't quite place. The driver laughed, loud and arrogant, convinced he had the upper hand. "You expect me to pick you up? Keep walking, old-timer," he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. A few pedestrians glanced over, some annoyed at the rude display, others intrigued by the older man's calm demeanor. The man didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply stood, composed and silent, as if the noise and chaos of the city had no effect on him. His posture alone spoke of discipline, of experience, of someone who had seen far more than this small moment of arrogance could offer. For a split second, the city seemed to pause. The driver, noticing a passerby staring intently at the man, felt a twinge of unease. Something about this stranger didn't feel ordinary. His breathing was steady, his movements measured, his presence commanding respect without a single word. And then it happened, the moment that would make the driver regret everything. He had no idea what he had just provoked. A subtle shift in the older man's stance, a calm yet sharp glance toward the driver, and the world seemed heavier, tighter, more focused. The man simply waited, unshaken, for what was about to unfold. Next, if you've ever misjudged someone at first sight, type respect in the comments. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? The rain continued to fall in gentle sheets, tapping against the taxi roofs and puddles on the sidewalk. Steam rose from manholes, mixing with the neon glow of the city, creating a surreal haze. People moved quickly, umbrellas clashing, tires splashing, and distant horns blaring. But amid all this chaos, the older man remained a pillar of calm, standing alone on the curb. The taxi driver, now slightly unsettled, wiped his hands on a rag and muttered under his breath, "Who does this guy think he is?" His smirk had faded, replaced by a flicker of doubt. Around him, the city moved at its frantic pace, but a subtle shift in attention was beginning. Pedestrians began noticing the calm, deliberate way the older man held himself, his shoulders straight, hands folded lightly, eyes scanning every angle. There was a discipline to him that didn't belong in a simple street encounter. Nearby, a passerby, a middle-aged man in a trench coat, stopped mid-step, intrigued. Something about him. "He's not ordinary," he whispered to himself, his eyes narrowing. Even from a distance, he could sense the quiet authority in the way the older man breathed, the way he surveyed the environment. It wasn't just confidence, it was experience, honed through years of skill that few could match. The driver, unaware of the growing scrutiny, tried to regain control of the situation. "Hey, I said move along," he barked, tapping the hood of his taxi impatiently. But the older man didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his jacket, the fabric shifting slightly in the rain, and maintained his gaze, unbroken and unshaken. The city seemed to blur around him, noise fading into the background. The passerby leaned closer, observing something else. The way the older man's feet were planted firmly on the wet pavement, balanced and ready, as if every step had been calculated. His hands, though relaxed, held a subtle readiness. It was a posture not of threat, but of someone entirely in control of themselves, and of any situation that might arise. For a moment, time slowed. The taxi driver's arrogance, once so bold, began to waver. A small unease crept into his chest. He had thought he was in control, but now the atmosphere shifted. Onlookers began to sense it too, the calm before something unexpected. The older man didn't say a word. He simply waited, exuding patience and quiet strength, as the passerby and a few curious pedestrians realized that he was not an ordinary man standing on a rainy city street. Something about his presence suggested a story far deeper, a power, restrained yet undeniable. The driver's eyes flicked nervously, and the passerby's whispered thought hung in the air. This is someone you don't underestimate. The taxi driver's smirk had faded completely. The rain-slicked street reflected his nervous movements as he leaned against the car, tapping the roof with restless fingers. He tried to regain control of the situation, but something about the older man made his confidence falter. Every passerby seemed to slow their pace, their eyes subtly drawn to the calm figure standing in the drizzle. The driver stepped closer, voice rising, trying to assert authority. "What? You think the world owes you a ride? I don't give lifts to anyone off the street, got it?" He jabbed a finger toward the older man, expecting a reaction. But the man didn't move. He didn't raise an eyebrow or mutter a single word. He simply folded his hands in front of him, the fabric of his coat shifting slightly with the motion, and stared forward with quiet focus. His presence alone seemed to widen the space around him, commanding attention without force. The driver, frustrated and increasingly uneasy, smirked in an attempt to cover his rising anxiety. "You probably spend all your time watching action movies, huh? Thinking you can just stroll up and get whatever you want." His laugh was sharp, almost desperate, bouncing off the wet pavement and echoing into the night. The older man's eyes didn't flicker. He didn't react. He simply exhaled slowly, the movement almost imperceptible, yet enough to convey patience, control, and a subtle warning. Every muscle in his body was calm, yet ready, poised to respond if the situation demanded. But a passerby who had been quietly observing muttered under their breath, noticing the tension. "Something's not right. He's not just any man standing there." The driver, unaware of these whispers, tried again to provoke him, stepping closer, shoving the tip of his umbrella toward him. The man didn't move. Instead, he took a subtle step back, creating just enough space to show he could act if needed, but choosing restraint. His eyes scanned the street, noting exits, obstacles, and the positioning of people around him. Every small gesture radiated discipline, precision, and experience far beyond a typical street encounter. The taxi driver's facade began cracking. He felt the weight of silent authority pressing down on him. His laugh had vanished. His bravado had melted into unease. What he had assumed would be a simple, easy encounter was now a confrontation he couldn't control, and he knew it, deep down. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The older man's patience became almost tangible, a force of quiet power that made the driver hesitate, reconsider, and realize he might have underestimated someone who could easily outmaneuver him without lifting a hand. And in that hesitation, the street held its breath, waiting for what would come next. If you've ever been caught off guard by someone who stayed calm under pressure, type "respect" in the comments. And tell me, what would you do if you were in the driver's shoes? The rain fell harder now, drumming on rooftops, taxi roofs, and the pavement. Streetlights reflected in slick puddles, casting long, distorted shadows across the wet sidewalks. The city moved around them in its chaotic rhythm, but the older man remained steady, almost detached from the storm of noise and motion. The taxi driver shifted uneasily, gripping the door handle, glancing around as if seeking backup. His earlier bravado had evaporated completely. Something about the older man unsettled him. It wasn't just calmness, it was precision, awareness, and a subtle confidence that didn't belong in a casual street encounter. Every movement, every pause seemed deliberate, measured, and purposeful. A passerby, watching from across the street, whispered under their breath, "There's something different about him. He's not ordinary. Look at the way he stands, like he knows exactly what's happening around him." Their eyes followed the man as he subtly shifted his weight, scanning the street and the vehicles with a careful, practiced glance. The taxi driver, still desperate to regain control, leaned further, out of his car. "You think you're some kind of expert? You don't know this city, this street, or me." His voice cracked slightly as he gestured aggressively. The older man didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if studying the driver, noting every micro movement, every small twitch. Then, almost imperceptibly, he raised a finger, pointing toward the alley beside the street. The driver's brow furrowed in confusion. "How did you—" The passerby muttered under their breath, eyes widening. The older man's subtle gestures revealed knowledge of the environment that no ordinary person could have. He had already assessed escape routes, obstacles, and potential threats without a single word. The driver's unease grew. His laugh, once sharp and mocking, had vanished entirely. The older man's quiet composure, combined with these small but precise actions, radiated authority that the driver couldn't challenge or ignore. Even the pedestrians nearby began to feel it. The tension in the air was palpable. Another passerby, now closer, whispered to a friend, barely audible over the rain. "I've never seen anyone so calm, yet so aware. That man knows exactly what's going on." He could handle anything. The driver's movements became more erratic, his foot tapping nervously on the wet pavement. Every glance he cast toward the older man carried hesitation, uncertainty, and growing fear. He had thought this was a simple refusal, just another arrogant encounter on a rainy street, but now he realized he had misjudged completely. The older man exhaled slowly, subtly, but his gaze remained steady, scanning the environment like a predator who already knows the outcome. The driver swallowed hard, unsure of what to do next. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if the city itself had slowed down. The rain, the honking, the pedestrians' movements, all fading into the background. Only two presences remained, the driver and the man who seemed to command the very space around him. The tension was electric. The driver's arrogance had been replaced by unease, his confidence replaced by fear. And in that silence, a single truth became clear to everyone observing. This man was far from ordinary. The rain had begun to taper off slightly, leaving the streets slick and glimmering under the dim city lights. The taxi driver's hands shook, subtly as he gripped the car door, his earlier confidence now replaced by uncertainty and fear. Around them, the city's rhythm continued, horns blaring, footsteps splashing through puddles, people hurrying along. But the older man remained entirely focused, composed, as if insulated from the chaos. The driver's eyes darted nervously, trying to reclaim some sense of control. "Listen," he said, voice uneven. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is my street, my rules. You either get moving or—" He trailed off, realizing his threat carried no weight. The calm, unwavering stare of the older man was enough to make him hesitate. Pedestrians had slowed their pace, some stopping entirely, sensing the invisible tension radiating between the two men. Whispers floated through the crowd. "There's something about him. I've never seen anyone so calm," another added. "He's like he knows exactly what's about to happen." Even in the dim light, the older man's presence seemed to command respect without a single word. Just then, a figure approached from the corner of the street, a uniformed police officer alerted by the gathering crowd. His steps were deliberate, careful, and his eyes narrowed as he took in the scene. The driver, panicking, pointed at the older man. "This guy, he tried to flag me down. I refused him. He's..." His words trailed off, a nervous tremor overtaking him. The officer stopped, taking a moment to truly observe the older man. Recognition struck like lightning. He froze mid-step, his hand hovering near his radio. "Wait. A second," he muttered, eyes widening. The older man's posture, his calm composure, the way he surveyed his surroundings, it all aligned with someone the officer knew well. Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" the officer asked, his voice low but firm, carrying a weight that made the driver's stomach tighten. The driver's jaw dropped, his bravado evaporating completely. The crowd fell silent, watching intently. Even the passerby who had been whispering moments before stepped back, sensing the shift in authority. The older man, still calm, simply nodded ever so slightly. his eyes meeting the officer's for a brief moment of mutual understanding. The officer's gaze hardened as he looked back at the driver. This man is not someone you underestimate. Not today, not ever. The words hit the driver like a punch to the gut. His body froze, and for the first time, he truly felt the weight of his mistake. The older man remained silent, composed, his presence alone speaking volumes. The officer stepped forward slightly, subtly reinforcing the silent authority radiating from the man. Pedestrians, witnessing the scene, felt the tension in the air, a dangerous calm, a quiet power that few could confront without consequence. The driver swallowed hard, realizing that what he had assumed would be a minor confrontation was actually a life lesson unfolding before him. His arrogance, his haste, his mockery, all crumbled under the weight of unspoken authority. For a fleeting moment, the rain, the lights, and the city all faded into the background. Only the driver, the older man, and the officer remained. And, in that silence, a single truth became painfully clear. The quietest people in the room are often the most powerful. The rain had mostly stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the dim glow of the city lights. The puddles reflected neon signs and the occasional passing car, creating fractured mirrors of the world above. The taxi driver's hands shook as he gripped the car door. His bravado was gone, replaced entirely by unease. Around them, the city moved as if oblivious, but the energy between the three figures, the driver, the older man, and the officer, was electric, charged with silent authority. The officer's gaze never left the older man. Recognition had hit him moments ago, and now he could no longer mask the respect he felt. He took a deliberate step closer, lowering his voice so only the driver could hear. "Do you realize who this man is?" The words struck with the force of revelation. The driver's mouth opened, then closed again, unsure how to respond. The older man remained still, composed, radiating a calm power that seemed to bend the surrounding environment to his presence. There was no need for words. The weight of his experience alone demanded acknowledgement. Pedestrians lingered at the edges of the scene, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding before their eyes. The officer finally spoke aloud, addressing both the driver and the bystanders who had gathered. "This man is the one who trained the elite tactical division that protects this entire city. Every high-risk operation you've ever heard about, every difficult rescue, every time law enforcement executed a perfect plan, he had a hand in teaching them how to survive, how to act under pressure." A hush fell over the crowd. The driver's face went pale. Sweat mixed with the drizzle on his forehead. His mind raced, trying to process what he had done. He had assumed this was just another street encounter, another pedestrian refusing a taxi ride, but now he understood the magnitude of his mistake. The older man, Steven Seagal, remained calm. He didn't gloat. He didn't threaten. He simply adjusted his jacket and shifted his weight slightly, a small movement that revealed readiness, experience, and discipline. Every subtle motion carried decades of mastery and control. The driver could feel it. Without understanding the full scope, he knew instantly that he had underestimated someone far beyond his comprehension. The officer continued, voice low but steady, carrying the weight of personal respect. "He's trained not just ordinary officers, but the tactical units that handle the city's most dangerous situations. I've personally worked under his guidance. I've learned from him. Every officer who respects his craft knows exactly who he is." The driver's eyes widened. His hands dropped to his sides. He had mocked. He had laughed. He had believed he was in control. But now he understood the full reality of what had just unfolded. His arrogance had collided with experience and mastery, and he had lost before he even realized the battle had begun. Steven gave a single, slight nod to the officer, acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them. Then he turned his gaze to the driver. No anger, no insult, just a calm, measured presence that demanded reflection. The driver could feel the weight of that gaze pressing down on him, forcing him to confront his own arrogance. For a long moment, silence dominated the street. The city's noise seemed distant, irrelevant. Only the realization hung heavy in the air. The man who had been underestimated was the one who commanded respect beyond any ordinary measure. The driver swallowed hard, unable to speak. His mistake was complete, and he knew it. The power of quiet, the strength of composure, and the authority of experience had revealed themselves in the most subtle yet undeniable way. The crowd, sensing the conclusion, slowly began to disperse, leaving the driver to absorb the lesson he had just learned. Steven Seagal, without a word of reproach, stepped back, ready to leave, his presence lingering like an unspoken warning. Never underestimate someone who moves through the world with calm mastery. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city streets shimmering under the scattered neon lights. Steam rose from the manholes, curling lazily into the cool night air. The crowd that had gathered slowly dispersed, whispers fading, leaving only the taxi driver, Steven Seagal, and the officer standing on the slick pavement. The driver's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the edge of his cab. His eyes, wide and uncertain, followed every small movement of Steven. He had been arrogant, careless, and dismissive, yet in the past minutes he had witnessed something far beyond comprehension. The quiet older man he had mocked, ignored, and underestimated was no ordinary pedestrian. Every subtle gesture, every calm glance radiated power, discipline, and mastery. Steven didn't speak. He didn't scold or belittle the driver. Instead, he exhaled gently, shifting his weight with effortless poise. Even in silence, his presence dominated the space, filling it with a quiet authority that left the driver frozen, speechless. Every muscle, every motion, conveyed years of experience, countless high-stakes operations, and an unshakable control over himself and the environment. The officer watched carefully, noting the driver's growing realization. "Do you understand now?" he asked quietly, his voice steady but firm. "This is why arrogance and assumptions can cost you more than just respect. It can cost you your confidence, your composure, even your dignity." The driver swallowed hard, nodding slowly. He had no words. His earlier laughter, his smirk, his mockery, it all felt shallow and insignificant now. The lesson had been delivered, with silent precision, leaving him humbled in the most powerful way possible. Steven finally took a single step toward the cab, his movements deliberate yet graceful. The driver instinctively recoiled, though it wasn't needed. Steven stopped, just a few feet away, his gaze soft but piercing. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement of understanding, a quiet bridge between experience and lesson. "You think strength is loud," Steven said quietly, voice calm and measured. "But real strength, real power, often speaks in silence." His eyes scanned the driver, assessing, yet never condemning. "The world respects the quiet ones who act with precision, patience, and purpose." The taxi driver's shoulders slumped. The weight of realization hit him fully. He had underestimated someone, assumed the worst based on appearances, and learned the hard way that the quietest people often hold the most power. There was no anger, no threat, only a lesson delivered through presence and discipline. The officer nodded approvingly. "Remember this," he said, voice low. "The people you see every day, the quiet, the unassuming, sometimes they're the ones who have faced the hardest battles, trained the strongest, and mastered the skills you can only dream of. Respect them." Steven turned, his movements deliberate and composed, walking slowly away down the street. His steps were measured, unhurried, leaving behind an aura of quiet mastery. The driver remained rooted to the spot, eyes following him, shame, awe, and respect mixing in equal measure. The officer stood nearby, silently observing, knowing the lesson had been etched into the driver's memory forever. For a moment, the city seemed still, the neon lights reflecting the slick streets, the air cool and heavy with the scent of rain and asphalt. The lesson lingered in the silence. Arrogance and quick judgments could crumble instantly against patience, calmness, and expertise. The driver finally exhaled, a deep breath of realization. He lowered his gaze, ashamed, yet enlightened. He had witnessed the quietest man in the room, someone underestimated by everyone at first, and had seen the full measure of power revealed without a single shout or violent gesture. As Steven disappeared into the night, the driver knew he would never forget this encounter. The lesson was simple but profound. Never judge by appearances, never assume control based on arrogance, and always respect those who remain calm under pressure. If you've ever learned a lesson from someone you underestimated, type respect in the comments and tell me, who's the quietest, most powerful person you've ever met?